Sara Upton is joining us today. She is a registered dietitian with a master's degree in exercise physiology and is a certified intuitive eating counselor and an International Association of Eating Disorder professional approved certified eating disorder specialist. She is the only clinician in the Tyler area with this distinguished eating disorder specialist credential. She's the founder of My Signature Nutrition here in Tyler, where she provides outpatient nutrition education and counseling specializing in the treatment of eating disorders and disordered eating. Sara, let's hear your words of wisdom.
That's right. Looking for the slides. So that's actually one of the last ones. There's a first one, but I'll go ahead and get started while you pull those up. There are two fish that are swimming along, and they happen to meet an older fish who's swimming in the opposite direction, who, as he passes by, he nods at them and says, "Morning, boys. How's the water?" The two young fish swim on for a while. And eventually one of them looks at the other one and says, "What the heck is water?" The immediate point of this fish story is that sometimes the most obvious, accepted behaviors, thoughts, beliefs around us are the ones that are the most difficult to see and talk about. And this is exactly what it's like to live in diet culture. Diet culture is a belief system that focuses on and values weight, shape, and size over well-being. Diet culture, thank you, is harmful for everyone, but it's particularly harmful for people who struggle with an eating disorder. Diet culture normalizes eating disorder behaviors, and it makes early intervention to treatment difficult, if not impossible. And much like the two fish swimming in the water, you won't even know that it's there unless you're aware of it. And it is my hope that when you leave today, that you will have a greater awareness of diet culture, that you will be able to help identify it, because when you do, you can help prevent eating disorders. You can help increase access to intervention and treatment, which in turn can prevent years of suffering and save lives. The thing about diet culture is, much like the water that those fish were swimming in all around them but didn't know it was there, that's what happens in diet culture. When you're immersed in it, you cannot see that it's there, because diet culture is very pervasive and tricky. Diet culture focuses on appearance, weight, shape, and size. It says that your worth as a human being comes from your body shape. It says that if you're in a smaller body, then you're worthy. But if you're in a body that's larger, then you're not. But you could gain your worth back by trying to lose weight. And so if you're trying to lose weight and you're doing something about it, then it says that you're better. And our culture really reinforces this. You've probably been in a situation like this before, and we're all a little bit guilty of it. But you see a friend that you haven't seen in a while, and you walk up to them and you say, "Hey girl, how you doing? I haven't seen you in forever. You look amazing. Have you lost weight?" Yeah, we hear it all too often. But if that's your friend, isn't she amazing because she's your friend? Isn't she amazing just for being? What happens when she gains that weight back? We know that 95 to 98% of all diets fail and result in weight regain. So you can lose the weight, but it tends to come back. And so if your friend falls into that 95 to 98%, what happens when she gains that weight back? Is now all of a sudden she no longer amazing? And it gets really confusing, because when we reinforce this message, we say that weight is more important than the person, that their weight and what they're doing is more important than how they're doing. And I see this all too often when I work with clients who struggle with an eating disorder. I had one adolescent client growing normally on her growth chart at about the 85th percentile. And she had always been on the 85th percentile. But she started losing weight. And her friend said, "You look amazing." And her parents said, "We're so proud of you for eating healthy." And her doctor said, "Just keep doing what you're doing. You're doing a great job." And she ended up going to the hospital for 6 months for eating disorder treatment because nobody asked her, "How are you losing weight? What are you doing?" And what she had been doing was extremely dangerous weight control behaviors, eating disorder behaviors that were reinforced because nobody asked what was going on. Diet culture also focuses on food as good or bad. Again, this is so common. We label our food. Food is good, bad, healthy, unhealthy, clean. I'm not really sure what the opposite of that is because dirty food is just food that's fallen on the floor. We say it's dangerous, it's killing you. I even saw one picture on social media this week that said, "Every bite you take is either making you healthier or it's making you sick." And when we eat food in this manner, it just increases anxiety. It increases stress. Every bite you eat is either right or wrong, and that's not what food is intended to be. But diet culture reinforces this and normalizes disordered thought patterns around food, which do not promote health or well-being. In fact, research shows that when we label food as healthy, we're less likely to eat it. Diet culture also focuses on eliminating entire food groups and says that it's okay. It also focuses on planned binges. Cheat day, anybody? And the trickiest thing about diet culture is that there's been a shift away from dieting to health. And I'm a dietitian. I do care about health. I do care about well-being. But what happens with the shift away from overt dieting to being healthy is that it's harder to identify. You've probably heard this before too. "Oh no, I'm not dieting. I'm just working on eating healthy." And so, since we know that diets don't work, diet companies now know that we know that diets don't work, and so they've shifted their marketing tactics. Now it's about wellness, lifestyle, healthy eating, clean eating, doing all of these things that are deeply immersed in diet culture that make you feel good or bad as a human being because you're eating in that manner, because you're doing something to change your body shape or size. But in the long run, it makes you feel worse. It decreases your relationship with food. It normalizes eating disorder behaviors and makes it harder for people to get the treatment that they need. Diet culture also focuses on exercise as punishment. It takes the joy out of exercise. It says that you need to exercise to make up for what you've eaten, for compensation, or to punish you. And our bodies were designed for movement. Joyful exercise is not an oxymoron. It's something that truly exists. But when we link exercise to weight, what happens is when the diet ends, the exercise stops. And when the exercise stops, all the health benefits of exercise are lost. And so when we uncouple exercise from weight, we see research supports that people will exercise throughout their life cycle and maintain those healthy benefits. But diet culture says, "Oh, that pizza, if you eat that pizza, you have to walk for X miles to make up for that slice of pizza," which only promotes shame, guilt, anxiety, stress, depression, overeating, undereating, disordered eating behaviors. It does not help people change their eating pattern. It makes them not want to exercise. It stigmatizes. And since we want people to be healthy, we want people to be well, we need to focus on ending diet culture and building awareness about it. Because diet culture interferes with your physical, mental, social, and spiritual well-being. It does not improve health. And when you're someone who has an eating disorder and you live in diet culture becomes the voice of this disorder. It normalizes the thoughts and the beliefs that you have. It may even applaud you on doing what you're doing, on being extra healthy and going the extra mile and doing the things that you're doing, which makes it really hard for that person to seek treatment. It makes it difficult for somebody to say, "I'm struggling," when they go to ask for help and the person says, "You're doing a great job being healthy." And you may think, well, what does it matter? Eating disorders, they're not that common. But eating disorders are way more common than you think. About 24 million Americans struggle with an eating disorder. 10 million women, 1 million men, yes, men get eating disorders too, struggle with anorexia or bulimia. And an additional 13 million men and women struggle with binge eating disorder. Beyond that, 1 in 5 women and 1 in 10 men struggle with an eating disorder or disordered eating. And disordered eating, while not a full-blown eating disorder, is still something that impacts quality of life and health. And a new statistic that I just heard last week said that 50 to 75% of Americans struggle with disordered eating. That number just blows my mind. So I'm always like, okay, so if I went to lunch with 3 other friends and we're sitting at a table, that means that I might be the only person at that table who's not struggling with disordered eating. When everybody else around you talks about food in terms of good or bad or clean or healthy, bonds over the whole 30, celebrates weight loss at all costs, it can be difficult, if not impossible, to know that this isn't healthy. Beyond that, 10% of high school students struggle with a diagnosed eating disorder. And a key word here is diagnosed, because we know eating disorders are significantly underdiagnosed, that only about 10 to 20% of people who struggle with an eating disorder actually receive treatment. 25% of college students struggle with a diagnosed eating disorder. And a number that's even scarier to me is this one, that 50% of adolescent girls and 30% of adolescent boys admit to using unhealthy weight control behaviors. And that's smoking, fasting, skipping meals, laxatives, vomiting. And the danger is when nobody says, hey, what are you doing to lose weight? Or when everyone around you is doing the same thing, it normalizes that behavior and says that it's okay. And it may not even be their peers. It may be coming from parents, siblings. And so unless we build awareness about it, these behaviors continue. And something even more concerning to me are these statistics, and I won't read through them. But I say that they're very concerning because if you look at the year that these studies were done, they're from the early to mid-90s. And if you think back to that time, we weren't talking about the obesity epidemic. We were not assessing BMI at school and sending it home on report cards. There was significantly less focus on body weight, shape, and size. And so I have to believe that these numbers have only increased over time. 1992, 81% of 10-year-olds afraid of becoming fat. This is what happens when we value weight, shape, and size at all cost. And something really important to know is that you cannot look at somebody and know if they have an eating disorder. And this is so important because when we think you can look at somebody and identify if they have an eating disorder, this prevents people from getting the help that they need. The reality is someone can have an eating disorder at any weight, shape, or size. And not just a eating disorder, any eating disorder. And that sounds funny, but you can be in a larger body and have what's called atypical anorexia, which means you meet all the requirements for anorexia, just not at a lower body weight. And when we focus on weight, we miss the behaviors, we miss what's going on where we can help intervene and get people to treatment. Most people will look normal. When we turn on the TV or the news or the media and we see images of people who have eating disorders, it's very sensationalized. So we see images of people who are extremely malnourished. And what happens is when those are the images that we see of people who struggle with an eating disorder, we think, oh, that's what somebody looks like when they have an eating disorder. But the reality is only about 10% of people who struggle with an eating disorder are in that severe underweight category. The rest of the people look normal, just like you or me, anywhere along that weight spectrum. And so what happens is when people who struggle with an eating disorder see that image on TV, they think, oh, I'm not sick. I look fine. And maybe as a healthcare provider, you might see it and think, they're not sick, they look fine. They don't look like I have an eating disorder. And I've even had clients go in to see clinicians and the clinician says, you look fine. You don't look like you have an eating disorder, which reinforces everything that they're doing. And we can even look at stuff that's come out recently, like Netflix's To the Bone, which I don't actually recommend watching if you haven't seen it. But it's a stereotypical portrayal of a girl with an eating disorder. Young, white, adolescent with anorexia, goes to a treatment center, and in that treatment center, there is one boy but mostly young white females, and there is one person of size, but they made the person of size have binge eating disorder. You can have binge eating disorder and be in a normal body size. But when we stereotype eating disorders, we hurt everyone, because then people aren't able to get the help that they need because we assume that they don't look like what they're supposed to look like. But there's not a face of an eating disorder. You can have an eating disorder at any weight, shape, or size, and the belief that you have to be a certain size prevents people from getting help. Next thing to know is that eating disorders do not discriminate. Anybody of any gender, age, race, ethnicity, culture, socioeconomic status can have an eating disorder. And much like To the Bone, where it was the young, white, adolescent female, that's what we've always thought. But the thing about eating disorders is research is significantly underfunded. And so people don't get the treatment they need, and we're not learning more until we have this research come out. And so as we've had more research come out, we've learned more and more. It was historically thought that men counted for about 1% of the population with eating disorders. And now we're seeing that that number has gone up to 25%. We also thought, young white woman, well, if you made it to age 30 and you didn't have an eating disorder, you did it. But that's not the case. We are seeing increases along the age spectrum. We've seen women in their 60s, 70s, 80s admitting to treatment centers at a higher level of care of treatment, inpatient residential treatment, for very serious eating disorders. One treatment center alone saw a 110% increase in admissions of patients over the age of 40. And it's not just at the higher end of the age range, it's also the younger end. Kids, 5 to 6 years old, afraid to eat because they don't want to be fat. And so anorexia being diagnosed younger and younger. So it's spanning across the age span. And we also know that with new research coming out of Trinity University in San Antonio, that lower socioeconomic status, we didn't even think to look there in eating disorders, but what we're seeing is that food scarcity plays a significant part in eating disorders and disordered eating, and that we're seeing this huge incidence in families from lower socioeconomic status. And so knowing that anyone of any age can have an eating disorder and you cannot tell by looking. The next thing to know is that eating disorders are the deadliest mental illness. This is from the National Institute on Mental Health, that eating disorders have the highest mortality rate of any psychiatric illness. How many of you learned about eating disorders in school? Some hands. How many of you learned how to treat eating disorders? I don't see any hands. And that's the problem. Even for psychiatrists, eating disorders are an elective. That's right, the deadliest mental illness is an elective for psychiatrists. And so what happens is only about 10 to 20% of people who suffer actually get the help they need. Somebody may know the definition of an eating disorder, but they may not know what to do to help that person get treatment, to help that person fully recover and go on to have a productive life. But what we do know is that early intervention saves lives. And so by building awareness about diet culture, by building awareness about eating disorders, you can help people who are struggling and help them to get the help that they need. And so some early warning signs to be aware of. The first, anorexia nervosa. And just briefly, an eating disorder characterized by restricted eating, severe dieting, that results in weight loss, accompanied by a significant fear of gaining weight or becoming fat. But that person has body dysmorphia, isn't able to see that. And so you may be able to see, you don't look well, but they won't be able to see that. And also, the inability to recognize the severity of the problem. And so they won't be able to see it. But some things for you to watch for: weight loss or failure to gain weight. So in adolescence, growing along a growth curve normally, and then it plateaus or drops off. Refusing foods once enjoyed. And this one's difficult. Maybe your child comes home or your loved one comes home and says, "I'm not eating pizza anymore, pizza is bad." You might think, oh, they're just being really healthy, let's celebrate that. But if that's their favorite food and you don't ask, well, why aren't you eating pizza anymore? Or what's going on that now you don't like pizza? You could unintentionally be reinforcing this disordered pattern that is on the pathway to an eating disorder. So changes in food preferences are something that is a very early warning sign. Insisting on only eating healthy food. And I know, I saw some faces like, what? But it's not able to eat other foods. So it's a very rigid eating pattern where only healthy foods are consumed, and that list of healthy foods may not always be logical. It may just be foods that feel safe to that person, and typically it gets smaller and smaller. So it may start here with pizza, and then it gets less and less and less and less, and at the end, there's very limited foods that they're able to eat. And so if you notice somebody saying like, oh no, I can't have that, no, 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 and not able to have foods they once enjoyed, cutting out foods, those are some early warning signs. Changes in eating patterns, rigidity with foods eaten, but also time that foods are consumed. So not able to have lunch at noon or 11:15 or whenever lunch is served, but insisting that it's only at a certain time. Feeling fat or disgusted, negative body comments. And this one's hard. I had a client who was not an eating disorder client who said, I realized that when I get together with all of my friends, all we talk about is how much we hate our bodies. And so sometimes it can be difficult to know that when your friend's saying like, oh my gosh, I look fat in this, or I feel fat, that could be a sign that something else is going on. Weighing often. I once had a client's mother say, I guess it wasn't normal that she packed her scale in her suitcase and took it with us on vacation and weighed everywhere we went. And it may not even be that extreme, but like weighing every day, becoming upset if they can't weigh, weighing multiple times a day, weighing in multiple spots, loss of menstrual cycle or delay in onset, isolating, withdrawing from friends and family. And it may even be that they start isolating from food events. So they'll go to a function, but they'll miss the food part, or they won't eat. And then it usually progresses from there to not engaging in activities they once enjoyed. Increased exercise. And again, this is where it gets difficult. I want people to exercise, but it's the obligatory exercise, the not able to miss a day. Exercising even though a doctor has said that they shouldn't exercise. Exercising when the weather is bad. Exercising when they're injured. Exercising when their friend is getting married and missing the wedding to go exercise instead. Becoming upset or distraught over not being able to exercise. It's this obligation to exercise that we get concerned about. With bulimia, again characterized by reoccurring episodes of binge eating followed by purging, and we typically think of purging as self-induced vomiting, but that's not all it could be. It could be any type of compensatory behavior. Also with the fear of gaining weight or becoming fat. And so some signs to watch for, again, weight loss, weight gain, weight fluctuations. And the thing about bulimia is most people who struggle with bulimia are at a normal body weight, even a little bit higher body weight. Most people are not in that severe underweight category, but sometimes they are. And so if you're watching for that, you may miss it. And with bulimia, avoiding eating with others, frequently going to the bathroom after eating, changes in eating patterns, vomit in the bathroom. I've had several parents find out about their child's eating disorder because their child wasn't sick, but they found vomit in the bathroom. And this one, I'm shocked that I even have to put it on here, but any admission to purging. I can't tell you how many clients come in, mostly adolescents, but sometimes adults too, who say, my parents knew that I was purging. I told them about 6 months ago, a year ago. They just told me to stop. Stop doing that. It's not good for you. Yeah, I see you shaking your head. That's right. And so they don't get help. And so it's this delay. And when they come to you, and that's a huge step to be able to go to your parent or a loved one and say, I'm really struggling with this. And instead of saying, oh my gosh, that must have been so difficult for you to come to me. Let's figure out what we need to do next. They say, oh, don't do that anymore. Just stop. And so typically being the adolescent or person who wants to do the right thing, they say, okay, I won't do it anymore. And so it continues and continues and gets worse until it's much more progressed than if they had just come in when they first started. And so what happens is that early intervention gets lost, and we see people coming in who are very progressed in the eating disorder. Feeling fat or disgusted, again, negative comments, very focused on body weight, shape, and size. And when we live in a culture that focuses on that, it's hard to see. Isolating, increased exercise. Binge eating disorder. Binge eating disorder is characterized by reoccurring episodes of binge eating. And there's a very specific definition to that. When binge eating was added to the DSM-5, people got really angry because they were like, oh, now we all have binge eating. No, it's a very specific definition. So a binge is defined as eating an amount of food that is larger than what most people would eat under similar circumstances, under a similar period of time, while also feeling a loss of control and accompanied by 2 or more of the following: eating while not physically hungry, eating until uncomfortably full, eating much more rapidly than normal, eating alone due to the embarrassment or guilt about how much or what someone is eating, and then a marked feeling of distress after eating. And so I tell you this so you can know, because you'll see it in November. People will say, oh, we're all binge eating on Thanksgiving. But no, we're not all binge eating. We may overeat, but we're not binge eating. Binge eating is very specific. And so binge eating, you might see weight gain or weight fluctuations. And if you think, oh, everybody who binge eats in a larger body, that's not true. People can binge eat and be in any body shape or size. It does tend to lean towards weight gain, but that's not always what happens. Avoiding eating with others due to embarrassment, guilt, or shame, or even just recently having a binge eating episode and just not really ready to eat yet. Changes in eating patterns. Eating large amount of foods at one time. Or coming home and saying, you know what, I don't like that pizza anymore. And then they put the pizza in the refrigerator and then they come back the next day and the pizza's gone. So missing food. Hidden wrappers. Often I hear underneath the mattress is where they tend to go. And so this is something to watch for. If you're finding hidden wrappers or missing food, this is a sign that something very serious is going on that requires additional help and treatment. Feeling fat or disgusted, negative comments, isolating. And so knowing that people can struggle and be hidden in plain sight. Eating disorder not otherwise specified is an eating disorder characterized by disordered eating and eating disorder patterns, but somebody doesn't quite meet the diagnostic criteria for anorexia or bulimia or binge eating disorder. So they may restrict their eating but not be at a low weight like the person with atypical anorexia. Or they may binge and purge, but not the amount of time that somebody who meets the criteria for bulimia. And the difficulty with this, and DSM-5 really helped to correct and get people into the true diagnostic categories, but the difficulty with EDNOS, or the new name is otherwise specified feeding and eating disorders, is that people who have that eating disorder think, well, I don't even meet the criteria for a full-blown eating disorder, so my eating disorder must not be that serious. But what research has shown is that this eating disorder is just as dangerous, if not more dangerous, because there seems to be this carelessness almost with the disorder, the belief that it's not as bad. And so there's more impulsivity, more use of behaviors, more dangerous behaviors, because they don't believe that it's as dangerous when it is. And so with eating disorder, not otherwise specified, it's hard for me to get on the newer name. It's weight loss, weight gain, weight fluctuations. Weight can move in any direction. And so when we focus on weight, we end up not helping people. Avoiding eating with others. Changes in eating patterns. Again, you might see them going without eating or then binge eating, or you might just notice them missing food. Feeling fat, complaining of feeling fat, frequent negative comments about body weight, shape, or size, isolating and increased exercise. And with atypical anorexia, and I think this is one really to mention, so that's somebody who significantly restricts their eating, is very focused on body weight, shape, or size, fear of gaining weight or becoming larger. They struggle with so much shame and guilt, typically in a larger body, very restrictive. What do you think happens when they go to their doctor? What do you think happens when they go to the gym or the grocery store? Their eating disorder behaviors are reinforced because people believe that they're deserved. And we're looking at the person, their body, not at what is really going on. And so we have to take that step back and say, what's really going on so we can help people get the treatment that they need. And next is disordered eating. And disordered eating, while not a full-blown eating disorder, is still one that is very significant and causes decrease in quality of life. And this is the one that is so normalized in our culture. Disordered eating is characterized by chronic dieting. So that person who's always on a diet, always off a diet, and that could be like the 5 pounds or the 10 pounds or 20, 50 pounds, that weight typically fluctuates. A rigid food and exercise plan, so your typical diet plan that you go on. Very rigid with eating, has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And then when that plan ends, guilt and shame from the inability to stick with that plan long term. Compensation, so making up. Oh, it's okay if I have this now, I'll just make up for it later. That's actually a disordered eating behavior. Being very weight focused, talking about body weight, shape, and size all the time, even avoiding social situations. Oh, I can't go with you to lunch today because I'm not eating that. Disordered eating. But when everybody does it, and it's the water that we swim in, it can be difficult to know that this isn't healthy. The good news is that recovery is possible. That about 60 to 80% of people who struggle with an eating disorder do go on to full recovery. They have careers, families, meaningful relationships. They live happy, healthy, and productive lives. And this is where you can help. Because when you're aware of the water that we live in, the culture that surrounds us, this normalization of disorder, then you can help prevent years of suffering and save lives. You can help to be the person that identifies eating disorders and helps that person to get treatment. And even if it's not so much about identifying somebody with an eating disorder, you can help change the way we talk about food and weight and body and exercise within our culture. And by doing so, in turn, you can help prevent eating disorders, because prevention is really the best treatment here. And so if you take one thing away from today, I hope that you remember this. When everyone around you is talking about food as good or bad, labeling foods, it can be difficult, if not impossible, to know that this isn't healthy. And so, in turn, we have to keep reminding ourselves, we have to keep going back and say to ourselves over and over that the things most hidden in plain sight are the ones that we need to be talking about, because when we don't talk about it, it normalizes that behavior, it normalizes that belief, it normalizes disorder. And so we must, like those fish swimming in water, we must keep reminding ourselves that this is diet culture. This is diet culture. It's incredibly hard to see, but by opening your eyes and being aware of what's out there, you can change this. Thank you.